We are now live on Facebook, and I would just pass over to my colleague, Alina Bricman, the Director of EU Affairs at MEP International.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today and joining us, whether you're watching us live on Facebook or on Zoom. I hope you're all staying well and healthy in your various lockdown locations. My name is Alina Bricman. I am the Director of EU Affairs at MEP International. We are a Jewish advocacy and service organization working globally to safeguard Jewish life, tackle anti-Semitism, but also play a role in ensuring human rights and the general health and safety of our societies. As we all try to make sense of the current situation, we see more and more that we're not only dealing with a health crisis and certainly with a lot of economic challenges, but also great challenges towards our democratic governance. We had this weekend two very important days to mark. Friday, we marked Liberation Day, 75 years since the Nazis capitulated to the Allied forces. And Saturday, we celebrated Europe Day, 70 years since the bedrock, basically, of the current European Union, the Schuman Declaration. And these two dates, which are obviously symbolically placed next to each other, I think are an important reminder of really what's at stake when we neglect to nurture our democracy. And so we thought it would be really important to explore how this current crisis has challenged EU democracies, what the EU is doing and could be doing more, but also how we hope to emerge from this crisis. I'm really privileged today to be joined by European Commission Vice President for Values and Transparency, Vera Jourova, MEP Terry Reintke, Vice Chair of the Greens, member of the Civil Liberties and Home Affairs Committee, and also Chair of the LGBTI Intergroup, MEP Dietmar Köster, member of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, and part of the Human Rights and Foreign Affairs Committees, and MEP Katalin Cseh, Vice Chair of Renew Europe, also a member of the Foreign Affairs and Human Rights Committee, as well as a doctor who has been on the front line. So thank you very much for all the work you've been doing to keep us safe. Vice President Jourova, you are tasked with upholding the rule of law, ensuring the democratic system is open and transparent, and also with coordinating a new push for European democracy. So your portfolio could not be more relevant to our conversation today. We're really grateful you are here with us, and let me give you the floor for your introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Alina. Can you hear me? Is it fine? Yes, thank you very much. Honorable members of the European Parliament, dear organizers from MEP, dear participants. Indeed, we are going through extraordinary times. And I think my portfolio was already relevant before COVID crisis, but now we see that this is a period which brings the pressures not only on the individuals, on the society, from the health and economic point of view, but of course, also we have to legitimately ask what will be the state of European democracies after the crisis is gone. And also, are there only risks or also opportunities for Europe in all that? And how can we counter the disinformation that is being spread about COVID-19 and preserve freedom of expression? And so, indeed, Alina, this is the right time to have this debate. Thank you very much for inviting me, because I not only want to share with you what is the plan of the Commission and myself, but of course also to hear the feedback from the members of the Parliament and from the public, and of course from the organizers. Well, in Europe, we will respond to this crisis in full respect of our fundamental principles and human rights. I have sometimes a tendency to use very, very simple sentences. So I would like to say that by killing the virus, we must not kill democracy. I think that this is very clear. For some, this might sound strange that we occupy ourselves with such a trivia like values, but I have lived through the experience of authoritarian regime in the communist Czechoslovakia. And I know things can go wrong and that rights, freedoms, and democracy is not a given forever. If we want to preserve and uphold them, we must cherish them and fight for them. In crisis, we need a compass that would help us to strike the right balance between the need to defeat the virus with safeguarding democracy and citizens' rights and freedoms. I want the Commission to play this role, and I would like to discuss this with you today. Let's start with the emergency measures, which were introduced in vast majority of states in the EU. They are legitimate actions for facing this challenge, but restrictions of some fundamental rights are inherent to emergency measures. This is why it is important that those measures include democratic safeguards. Any emergency measure must be limited to what is necessary and strictly proportionate and cannot mean switching off national constitutions or EU law. Such measure has to be limited in time and face scrutiny of the people, normally by elected parliament. This is why I decided that the Commission should monitor the emergency situations and regimes in the member states, especially from the point of view of their impact on the rule of law and fundamental rights. The focus here is to closely scrutinize limitations which might go beyond what is proportionate or measures which might breach EU law. We take a proactive approach to this monitoring. We are drawing on information collected from different sources, including information made available by the member states, direct feedback from European citizens, journalists, civil society organizations, and of course also the Fundamental Rights Agency. This is why we stated in the joint exit roadmap that the exceptional emergency powers should be replaced by more targeted interventions by governments in line with their constitutional arrangements. Another area where I want us to pay particular attention is freedom of expression and free and independent media. Media are not only an industry sector, they are also the fourth estate. The weaker they are, the weaker the democracy. Now, it is more important than ever that the journalists are able to do their job freely to ensure that our citizens have access to crucial information and to counter disinformation. We plan to reflect key rule of law developments stemming from the crisis in the upcoming first ever annual rule of law report. This report will be published in September and will describe the situation in all the member states. It is meant as a preventive tool and as a basis for dialogue with the member states, and also between and among the member states. Also, by the end of this year, we plan to present a reviewed strategy on the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights. This will give us another opportunity to reflect the importance of fundamental rights and how they can be applied on the ground. We know very well that there are rule of law challenges in some of our own member states. I think our founding fathers and the authors of the Lisbon Treaty were perhaps too optimistic. They did not foresee that European politicians, after experiences with tragic war and authoritarian rule from both right and left, would be tempted to take inspiration from this authoritarian playbook. We have all worked under lockdown conditions, but we have not locked in our actions in defense of the rule of law. You might have seen that recently we adopted a new infringement case against Poland regarding further legislative changes, which undermine the independence of the judiciary. And we are monitoring the situation around elections in Poland that were supposed to take place yesterday. This week, I will address the European Parliament on the emergency legislation in Hungary and its impact on the rule of law and fundamental rights, as the situation has aroused particular concerns. I am worried about the situation in Hungary because this emergency decree comes in certain rule of law context. We will monitor carefully all measures adopted under these powers. But being vigilant on rule of law means being vigilant towards all the member states. This is a responsibility not only of the EU institutions, but also of the national authorities and each and every one of us. I can already tell you that we might need more tools, including, I hope, the new multi-annual financial framework mechanism that links the EU funds with the rule of law. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, democracy means also respect for minorities and support for the less fortunate in our societies. While this is a symmetric shock, the impact on people will be asymmetrical. The COVID-19 crisis is exacerbating pre-existing inequalities due to stigma, stereotypes, and racial discrimination. Many people face additional challenges during these times. I see reports about increased violence against women, but also about increased racism. In the Commission's recovery plan, we are considering short-term measures to immediate assistance to the marginalized groups suffering from this crisis. I am also extremely worried about the possible repercussions that the COVID crisis may have on minorities, such as Jewish Europeans. Anti-Semitic hate speech online has increased by 30% since the beginning of this crisis, as conspiracy theories have spiked. The attacks in Halle, Pittsburgh, or Christchurch have shown that the lane from words to dreadful actions can be very short. We will therefore not wait until the next attack on a Jewish community to happen. Rather, I want to ensure that the fight against anti-Semitism is part of various relevant policies, from countering disinformation to the prevention of radicalization and counter-terror measures. History of the European Union is nothing else than a story of rising together through crisis. When the going gets tough, Europe gets going. This weekend, we have celebrated the Schuman Day that reminds us of this. A new push for democracy in Europe is a headline ambition of this Commission. I was entrusted with preparing a European Democracy Action Plan by the end of this year. The aim is to help improve the resilience of our democracies and address threats, including of external interference in European elections. I plan also to counter disinformation and to adapt to evolving threats and manipulations, as well as to support free and independent media. I invite you all to feed your ideas into our preparatory steps. Democracy is fragile and needs to be taken care of. As our president, Václav Havel, was spot on when he wrote, quote, "The natural disadvantage of democracy is that it is extremely tiring to those who mean it honestly, while it allows almost everything to those who do not take it seriously." End of quote. And if I may add something today, I would also include to those who want to abuse it. Thank you very much for your attention and cooperation.
Thank you very much for this important remarks and also providing a lot of the broader EU picture, but also diving into some of the specific cases that we're all kind of watching very, very carefully. And I'm really glad that you also mentioned the particular effect that the crisis is having on minorities, the rise in anti-Semitism that has occurred. I think these things are always a great indicator and barometer of the health of our democracies, in fact. We wanted to make this a little bit interactive and also to recreate a bit of the Brussels setup of the hearings for anyone missing the plenaries. So I would just like to invite the MEPs to each address questions to the remarks of the Vice President. I suggest collecting the three of them, and then the Vice President can kind of make a compacted answer to all three.
Who will start? May I begin? Yes.
Since you managed to unmute first.
Okay, sorry. Okay, thank you, Alina, for organizing this webinar, and thank you very much, Commissioner and Vice President Jourova, for your introduction. In general, I will agree with all the things you have mentioned, but I would disagree on one point. You have mentioned that we apply the democracy and the fundamental rights in Europe the whole time. I have really deep concerns what the situation of the refugees is, and that we are still facing the situation of the refugees in the Greek camps. We know all that all these camps are overcrowded, especially in Lesbos, and still we haven't any indication that the virus is on Lesbos. But I think if we are really want to stick to fundamental rights, it is very important what we are doing for the migrants and refugees, especially on the Greek islands. And at the moment, my impression is not that we are sticking to fundamental rights regarding this question, this issue.
Thank you very much, MEP Köster. Terry, would you go next then, and then we go to Kathalin.
Sure. Also from my side, thank you very much, Madam Commissioner, for this very eloquent and I think also very comprehensive situation of rule of law in the European Union. My question goes a little bit beyond the things that you have mentioned. You know that last week the German Constitutional Court has ruled on the ECB and the PSPP, so rescue program dating back to 2015. Now, we have seen over the past years that in a lot of cases when rule of law was under attack, very often the ECJ was also being attacked by specific governments. And we have seen that the ECJ was one of the European institutions that was absolutely incremental in keeping up rule of law and democracy in Europe. Now, my question is maybe very, very briefly, what is your assessment of the situation and what do you think the Commission should do? Because if I can say from my side, I think destabilizing the Court of Justice of the European Union is something that would be a very, very dangerous path to go down, especially in the situation that we are in right now. So I can only hope that the Commission is going to act on this and stand firmly with this very important institution of European democracy. Thanks.
MEP Cseh, we can go to you now.
Thank you very much, and thank you, dear Commissioner, for this very extensive overview. I would have a quite specific question for you. As you know, many of us in Hungary are deeply worried that the Orbán government took away vital funds from municipal governments, and it's not difficult to perceive this as a case of political revenge against opposition-led cities. And you gave an interview yesterday to the FAZ newspaper where you encouraged municipal governments who are stripped of their revenues to go to court against the Orbán government. And you also said in the interview that one needs to find out whether courts serve the law or the party in their cases. So if you could give a bit more specifics about the statement, what is your recommendation for these local governments if they don't succeed in the court? And also, well, these local governments often do not have the luxury of time. They need money to help their constituents and also to get out of the crisis. So do you see any legal means for these municipalities to get emergency funding? Could you, for instance, imagine a scheme where part of the emergency EU funds, which are now controlled by the central government, can be directly assessed by the final beneficiaries? Thank you.
And Vice President, before going back to you, I want to also pull in a question from the audience submitted in advance. This is from Leonie Martin, the president of the Young European Federalists, who asks, what are you going to do if some of the safeguards that you yourself mentioned that governments must put in place are not being respected, and if the emergency measures are not ended once the crisis is ending?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now? Am I heard? Yes, so I will go through the questions, how they were asked. Indeed, the situation in Greek islands is varying. But I know that my colleagues Margarete Skinas and Elsa and Madam Commissioner Johansson, responsible for migration and security, is really doing a lot, not to only declare that the fundamental rights and the security and health of the refugees must be protected, but also doing concrete steps. There is relatively high funding which is provided to the Greek government, and also there have been taken concrete actions to create the capacities on the territory of Greece to be able to move, to transfer the people who are endangered by COVID to the safe places. There is also some creativity, speaking about the hotels, which might be used for the people who might be endangered. So there is a lot of measures also related to the children. You know that there is now a concrete action to transfer to how to say it, to enable the unaccompanied minors to leave the hotspots and to have a chance to live in other places in the EU. The situation of the children is particularly varying because we have many very reliable sources of information that in case of unaccompanied minors, the probability that they will fall victims of crime or they will be included into some criminal activities, that it is very real, that this probability comes. I saw a study which said that if the unaccompanied minor is not cared for within 48 hours after he or she comes to the territory of the EU, the probability that it will be the victim of the crime is really almost 100%. So that's why we are also encouraging the Greek authorities to use the EU money to guarantee secure stay in the islands, but also in Greek, in the inland territory, to enable the children to get the foster care or the guardianship as soon as possible. There is a very long list of very concrete actions supported by the EU funding. But I don't want to sound optimistically, because this is a very varying, alarming and dangerous combination of the refugee status of the situation, which already was complicated before COVID, and now under this emergency situation relating to corona spread. But as I said, the Commission is doing a lot, and also I have to say that the Greek authorities do not have very easy task at all, and we try to support them in doing more, because they have to react every day on the new situations. I also asked the Fundamental Rights Agency to monitor the situation and to give us the report as soon as they have concrete data, because I think that this is also important, that we have relevant updated data every week. On the German Constitutional Court decision, I think that we said two things, that it is fresh and that we have to analyze the decision, and this is still ongoing. Our lawyers are working on it, but immediately after the court decided, we declared two things. The European Court of Justice and its role is absolutely incremental, as Madam Reintke said. If we do not have this absolute certainty that the decisions of the European Court of Justice will be respected in Europe, then we remove the steady pillar we are founded on. I think that this is very clear, that this is the role in the rule of law issues. You know that the Commission is always very careful. We start the infringements where we have the legal ground, and we always we have to wait for the decision of the European Court of Justice to tell us what's legal, what's the legal order, how to interpret the EU law. And it's not a trivial task. And when the European Court of Justice once decides, these decisions must be respected. So it's one thing. And the other thing, immediately we came with a confirmation of the principle that there is primacy of the EU law in Europe. So it's for the moment. Of course, now it'll be for the European Central Bank to come back to the court with the documents which are requested. This is the ongoing process. And also the Commission will come with more precise analysis. But these two principles, the role of the ECJ and the primacy of the EU law, I think it's very clear that clearly stated by the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and by several colleagues. I agree with Madam Reintke that without recognizing this role of the European Court of Justice, we would embark on a very dangerous path in Europe. On Hungary, yes, indeed, I reflected in my interview on the news that the local communities, the local governments are facing difficulties in this emergency regime, that they do not have sources and they cannot deliver the service, the public service, as before the emergency regime. We said very clearly that emergency regimes are necessary in the times of crisis, but they have to be proportionate and the decisions have to be relevant. At the same time, we said very clearly, when I say we, it's the Commission which is assessing the situation and monitoring. So we said that emergency regime doesn't mean that the constitution is switched off. And in this moment, I would really love to be the Hungarian lawyer who understands Hungarian law and Hungarian language. I would really like to look into the constitution of Hungary, whether there is a provision which foresees the active role of the local communities and local governments. I would guess there is such a provision. And then comes another comment I meant that it should be for the Hungarian courts to say whether this is proportionate and relevant measure relating to the local governments. I don't have the answer now. I am not a lawyer who understands the Hungarian law in detail. But I understand that in all the member states, we have constitutions which guarantee the free provision of the service from the side of the local communities and cities and municipalities, which are so important now in this time when the people are in trouble. The first place they expect help, somebody who will understand their threats and their difficult situation. It's usually the self-government and the municipality, the place they live in, and the municipalities are playing incredibly important role. So I don't understand so much what's happening in Hungary. I am far from saying that it's a revenge from the government. I have also to be careful in my declarations, but that's why I mentioned that there is some work, obviously, for the Hungarian courts. And the question whether the Hungarian courts serve the party or the law, of course, the key question which we have to ask in all the member states, because this is the primary principle of the rule of law and of the state which respects the rule of law, that the courts are independent and that they are in a good sense, servants of the law. This is what I would like to see in Hungary. On what Alina asked me, well, the questions are not very easy indeed, but I have to face the fact that I'm not doing an easy job. What if emergency measures will not be lifted? We, of course, said many times also in the exit strategy, and now we are publishing a lot of recommendations how to get back to the old normal. So we said that the emergency measures must be necessary and time limited. And when the time comes, when it is due to be lifted, it's up to the member states. But I would say it should be prolonged till the date necessary, but not any day longer. We have to come back to old normal. And in Hungary, specifically, I have to say at least to the old normal, at least, yeah, because, and in Poland as well, because you know that we are running the procedure under the Article 7, and this is already showing that we have concerns that there is a systemic breach. But I want to finish this very long answering. I know I speak long. By being positive, I am here also to start a new dialogue with Hungary and also with Poland, because there we have issues. I believe that the main, how to say, the strongest voice in the member states must be the one for the voters, for the people. They need, or they should desire to have old normal situation with all the freedoms guaranteed. And I think that there is a common work for all of us to guarantee that the emergency measures will not last forever in any of the member states. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Indeed, you certainly don't have an easy job, and we hope that the situation won't contribute further to making it even more difficult. We'll continue to discuss these points on the panel. We hope you'll be soon able to return to Brussels, and until then, we send our greetings to Prague. Thank you very much for being with us today. And
thank you very much. It was not a complaint that I have an uneasy job. But I want to say that I will be physically present at the plenary session at the Parliament on Wednesday on the Hungarian point. Thank you very much and have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye. All right, so as I mentioned, we've already dived into a lot of the specifics that came up from your questions. Some I was expecting, some less, which is fantastic. But before I let you maybe react on some of the things that were said, I was also watching your faces, and I see that you are eager to reflect. I want to take first a step back and look at the moment when actually the pandemic hit. One of the first responses from member states was to close the borders. We all each kind of went into our own home countries, and different governments had their own very individual responses. Around 15 member states are having some sort of emergency situation in place. And in this context, I'm wondering whether you feel that there was a unified EU response, that there is an EU answer to the current situation. What has the role of the EU as you see it been so far? Maybe I'm going to start with MEP Czech.
Yes, well, I think we need to analyze this situation for a very long time after the crisis passed, but I also hope that this analysis will be more fruitful compared to prior similar analyses. For instance, just very recently, I dived into a 2010 document where the European Council made remarks about the common response around the H1N1 pandemic and made recommendations how to avoid making similar mistakes. And I just have to say that these recommendations, like, let's say they are still valid. So as if we didn't really learn anything in the 10 years time, and we once again made the same mistakes. We were too slow, we weren't harmonized enough, we acted unilaterally. Of course, I think most of governments were taking safety first. However, we also saw how big of a confusion it caused when borders were just closed from 1 minute to another. We can speak about queues of lorries being stuck at the borders. We can speak of vital medicines not being able to get to their final destination, but also the human rights and rule of law situation that is also very, very prominent. Well, I mean, I certainly believe that we need strong public health responses to protect life during the pandemic, but we can protect our health and respect human rights in the same time. This is not a zero-sum game. And well, if we just like very briefly look through what happened in this continent, of course, there are some extremes like Hungary and Poland, where the public health crisis was basically used as a facade to introduce unacceptable legislation on many levels. But there were other governments also that we do not really talk about that much. For instance, Latvia, Romania, and Estonia wanted to break free from their obligations under the European Convention of Human Rights, which I think it's very, well, unheard of in that sense. But other countries such as Belgium, Germany, Poland, they use anonymized data of mobile phones users to track their movements. And this is also very questionable where it will lead to on the long run. I just have to say that let's make sure that we always remember that the European Convention on Human Rights and similar provisions, they were never meant for fair weather circumstances, but rather as a bastion to protect democratic rule of law and fundamental rights against attacks, even in the most precarious situations. Those rights, like the right to health, economic and social rights, and civil and political freedoms, are all very relevant in the present context. And rights are there exactly to protect the vulnerable who are much more exposed when a crisis hits. And Europe has to be there to guarantee these rights to everybody. The antidote to this virus can never be the killing of our basic principles of our European soul. And we have to safeguard the rights of our citizens even more in this time of crisis. And just to sum it up, I think that it's vital now to act fast and for the EU to focus on containment to avoid potential spillover effects to other EU countries. Every new initiative we take has to include some sort of a conditionality clause. We should not look away any further, because if we just look back from our other more difficult historic times, it's very visible to see where these unilateral measures can lead to, and we have to be very vigilant, and the EU has to live up to the expectations, I suppose, the citizens pose towards us as European leaders.
Thank you very much for that, and I particularly appreciate your point about the fact that, you know, the EU is tested particularly in these challenging times, and that's when we can actually measure how far we've come. Terry, would you go next?
I think I will be a little bit more brief because I think Katka has already said a lot of important points. I just wanted to make one comment, and I think that, for example, if we see the closing of the borders, it's true also Germany, the first reaction was we have to close borders because we don't really know, but we have to close the borders. And I think that this is, on the one hand, very worrying because it shows that there is this kind of like crisis nationalism, and we have seen that also in the past. You first think about your own backyard and then you think about the others. But I think at the same time, and this is maybe something that I don't have so much from the discussions that I have with people in Brussels, but more like my, let's say, extended family, people who really don't have, like, they are not, well, very fiery Europeans, first and foremost. They are mostly conservative, blah, blah, blah. And they said that, you know, in this situation, they have realized how valuable Schengen actually is, and the right to be able to travel all over the European Union, and how many problems arise from the point when you are actually closing borders. And I think maybe in a positive spirit, in a lot of ways, this crisis, I mean, it has a lot of problematic sides. We're also going to go deeper into the specific examples later on, but I think it can also be maybe a coming to terms and awareness around all the good things that we have in the European Union, and also make us realize where we don't have them yet. Because I think the reference to the crisis response and what we should have actually done beforehand already to have preventive measures at hand when something like this comes up, I think it gives us a lot of tasks for the future of where we still need more coordination on a European level in order for the next time to be in a better position to respond together in a coordinated way, and not to have this everybody thinks about themselves first, but we need to have a common European response. And I think very much in the spirit of the Schuman Declaration, you know, Europe will not be created all at once, but it will, and not by a single plan, but it will be a little bit, you know, we do this, we do that, and through that create effective solidarity. I hope that this will be the lesson learned from this crisis.
Thank you, Terry, and I will move to Dietmar now. If
Yes,
there's something you want to add.
Yes, as my both colleagues have still mentioned, at the beginning of the crisis, the EU member states did not act in a coordinated way. And so we had really a mess at the beginning. We had really a lot of traffic jams at the borders. And this shows, as Terry has mentioned it, how important the single market for the European Union is. We really need this free movement of goods, the free movement of persons, and of public services. And all these things are suspended at the moment, more or less. And this shows the deep crisis we are in. And for me, it is clear it is inconsistent what the European Union is doing regarding the closing of the borders. For example, in Germany, the borders between Germany and Belgium and the Netherlands is open, but to Luxembourg it is closed. Nobody can understand why the border to Luxembourg is closed, and the Luxembourg citizens are really angry about that, and they are right on this, that they are angry about this. And I cannot understand the action of the German Interior Minister Jourová in that way. And so for me, the coronavirus is not a question of borders. If we have some areas in the European Union, we have to think how we can contain the areas. For in Germany, in the county of Heinsberg, we must think about what we can do that the virus could not spread over the country. But to close borders, I don't see any sense at all at the moment in this case.
Thank you very much for that as well. I'm very conscious of time, but I do want to get to a few of the specific which I think are very much on everyone's mind when they hear the title of this conversation. So, Kathalin, I was seeing your facial reactions when the Vice President was speaking about Hungary, and so I'd like to let you elaborate a little bit on the situation back home. I mean, the debates in the parliament on rule of law questions in Hungary were already ongoing in 2012, and things only kind of escalated. Article 7 was triggered, and then still the situation was somewhat increasing. What do you feel has been particular to the COVID crisis?
Well, yes, as you mentioned, the problems did not start 2 months ago in Hungary, but rather for many years now, the Hungarian democracy has been backsliding. And well, I'm afraid that I'm not really satisfied with the way the European community reacted, and particularly how the European People's Party reacted to Mr. Orbán's so-called tendencies over the past years. And I'm also very sad, by the way, that I won't be able to speak in the Hungary debate in Parliament because I'm unable to travel, and we still do not have a way to join plenary from videos. But well, maybe that's also a reform we should address later. Regarding what's going on in Hungary, just to sum up, on the 30th of March, the Hungarian parliament passed the state of emergency bill to fight the corona crisis, just like it happened in many other countries. However, the Hungarian law is very special for one reason. It has no time limit. It establishes a state of emergency, which allows the prime minister to rule by decree. No elections or rallies can take place. It introduced jail terms for spreading fake news, for instance, which is very worrying for many of the remaining free media outlets because of the tendencies of the Hungarian government to silence critical voices. And this state of emergency will remain in force as long as the government wants, because there is no, absolutely no sunset clause in it. I think it's very much unprecedented. And one very particularly worrying aspect of this bill comes when we look at how it was used. What I mentioned in my intervention to Vice President Jourova, ever since this bill was introduced, a lot of measures were put in place where city councils are essentially being bleeded out. Last October, the opposition had a large victory in the local elections. And well, now in the name of acquiring extra funds to fight the virus, the Hungarian government decided to redirect over 100 million euros from city councils to the government. So we feel that Mr. Orbán uses the crisis as a facade to further consolidate his power and to violate the basic European concepts on the rule of law and fundamental rights. And if I may just have some more minutes to address the EU's position in this very briefly, I'm very unhappy that the European Council and the EU leaders have been much less willing to openly tackle the issue than, for instance, the European Parliament or the Commission. The EU's mandate on the rule of law and fundamental rights is unequivocal. If a country wants to join the European Union, they would have to be a consolidated democracy. Right now, Hungary is not a consolidated democracy, according to Freedom House. The post-accession compliance should be key. However, as member states rely on each other to pass laws in councils such as the financial framework, they refuse to take action, real action, when a serious breach is in place. Ms. Judith Varga, the Hungarian Justice Minister, has just put forward their willingness to veto the MFF if further measures go on regarding the Hungarian state of rule of law. This blackmailing is completely unacceptable, in my opinion. So I hope that EU leaders will find the courage to speak up for the union's basic values and back up their words with concrete steps. I'm a big believer in the conditionality mechanism. However, we also have to make sure that final beneficiaries are protected, such as the question I put forward to Vice President Jourova. If the Hungarian government is cut from, for instance, EU funds because they violate the rule of law situation, we have to make sure that these funds reach their final beneficiaries, the cities, the small and medium-sized companies, through a mechanism, for instance, via the European Commission or other direct management solutions. And one last closing remark. Conditionality should be backed up by compulsory membership to the European Public Prosecutor's Office, because I find it completely horrendous that Mr. Orban builds up his regime from the European taxpayers' money, and he doesn't even guarantee any sort of oversight for those European taxpayers whose pockets this money is taken from. So there is a lot to deal with, but I'm hopeful that eventually we will be successful in ensuring that Hungary stays a democracy.
Thank you very much for this, for making this a condensed summary. I think since you mentioned the European People's Party, indeed we reached out to a tremendous number of EPP colleagues, and I think the fact that they are not here today may also be an answer in itself. I want to bring in MEP Reintke to also give us a bit of a summary on Poland, and I think especially on the point of decisions being blocked in the council, we really see a pairing up here. So could you give us a brief overview of what's going on there?
I just wanted to say, I think Dietmar has to leave soon. So if he wants to go first, I still have 10 minutes to stay. Then we can hear his intervention as well. I don't want to mess up the moderation, Ali, but I thought.
Not at all, of course. Actually, I wanted to, following your interventions, to actually turn it a bit to the positive and see if there are any best practices to be shared from Germany, perhaps, which has already been given as a positive example, but also to speak a bit more to this question of conditionality with regards to respecting human rights, because we speak a lot of EU mechanisms which are really tedious to follow by the general public, and really require a lot of expertise, but much less on what seems much more fundamental, the extent to which the EU monitors how fundamental rights are being respected.
Yes, thank you, Terry, for giving me the floor and giving me the opportunity to explain a bit more. From my point of view, I want to emphasize the following. The corona crisis makes clear that we are living in times of high uncertainty, and there is a loss of control, of personal control and societal control. And many ordinary people are worried that they must deteriorate their normal life, their everyday life. And these fears are real. They are losing their jobs, they get less money, and so on and so on. And I think for the European project, it is most important to emphasize that there is a strong link between a functioning welfare state and democracy. If people have the imagination that the democracy did not deliver something for their social security, then there is a big threat that they turn away from democracy. And therefore, we must emphasize our values of solidarity and social justice. And we must give answers to all the ordinary people who are scared so much what will happen to their life. And this is for me very important. And if we do not give answers, then they are looking for scapegoats. And we know from history well which kind of scapegoats coming on the table. We know when they are discussing nonsense like the Jews are guilty and so on and so on. And therefore it is very important to give an answer on all these existential questions the ordinary people have. And to show it from one example, at the weekend we had demonstrations which are organized from extreme right-wing forces, and there are some of the middle-class citizens, because they have the fear what is happening now. And this scares me a lot. I think the last week in Germany were really bad days for Europe, not only regarding the decision of the Constitutional Court in Germany, but the demonstrations here in Germany at the weekend, where a lot of supporters of the conspiracy theory were on the streets. And I think we must be, as Democrats, be really cautious and sensitive, and we must develop a strategy to tackle these new development of the far-right movement in Germany, for example.
Thank you very much, MEP Köster. I think like what you said is really important, that the fear is real and it's something that, you know, we must pay attention to and accept as genuine, but also I think political representatives have such an important role to play in shaping the discourse and addressing these fears. Thank you very much for being with us today. I want to let you go and also thank you for ending on this broader note about solidarity and social justice. Thank you very much for being with us today. And I hope we will be able to meet soon in person.
Thank you very much, and all the best to my colleagues. Bye.
So before moving on to Terry, I just want to bring in another question. This one is from Bini Gutmann, the president of the European Union of Jewish Students. Since MEP Köster mentioned this idea of solidarity, Bini speaks of the fact that it's really important for young Jews to also stand in solidarity with the Roma community, and is wondering what the European Parliament can do to ensure the fundamental rights for the Roma community. So in your general remarks about Poland, but also more broadly, perhaps you can also touch on this after that, and then I will also ask Kathalin to do the same.
Oh my God, now I could give a 5-minute intervention on anti-Gypsyism in Europe and how it's been exacerbated through the crisis. But I first want to make the 3 remarks I wanted to make on Poland, because I think it's still important, and also the Commissioner has touched upon it. And I think also to a little bit complement what has been said on Hungary, it's important to see what is happening in Poland. The first one is, of course, on the independence of the judiciary. This is also something that is not new. It's not coming from the crisis, but it has been there before, that basically the ruling party in Poland is trying to take political control of the judiciary, and this obviously brings separation of power out of balance, and that is a big problem in democracies. And I would like to highlight one thing there, because this is something that is referred to very often when we talk about Hungary and Poland. Just because a government has been elected by the majority of casted votes, it does not mean that this government can do whatever they want for the time of the term, because we need to have safeguards like separation of powers, like rule of law, an independent judiciary, minority rights, and so on and so on. Otherwise, as also Katka said, there is no consolidated democracy, basically. The second point I wanted to make, and they're also broadening the scope, and I think I can maybe refer to Bini's question in this regard as well. We speak a lot, especially in Poland, about independence of the judiciary and like the institutional functioning of a democracy, which is absolutely crucial. But we also have to look at fundamental rights of individual people. And I think in Poland, and I mean, you can see this, this wonderful flag, and also Ali has mentioned it in the beginning, I'm the co-chair of the LGBTI intergroup. In Poland, we see that there are specific groups that are also specifically attacked by the government. And in Poland, that is amongst others the LGBTI community. By now, a lot of municipalities have declared themselves as so-called LGBTI-free zones, because LGBTI issues are an ideology that has to be fought against. I think that this is really deeply worrying, and this is why we want the Commission, when they look at Poland, but also obviously when they look at cases like Hungary, not exclusively to look at institutional power and how it's under attack, but also to look at fundamental individual rights. And with regards to Roma, in some member states, we have seen, I think Bulgaria was the most obvious and horrifying example. We have seen that basically Roma were scapegoated for the spread of the coronavirus. They were segregated. Many already live in segregated settlement. This has even been fueled further. The authorities have basically supported this kind of rhetoric. And this is why I think moving ahead now with defending Roma rights is even more important. We will see the implementation report on the national Roma strategies. My colleague Romeo Franz, who himself has a Roma background, is working on this. And I can only say, I think these things, they're really interlinked. LGBTI phobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Gypsyism, and this is also why we need to have a holistic response to that, also under Article 7 procedures and other measures taken regarding rule of law. And then lastly, I wanted to say, I could now also speak long about the presidential elections in Poland. You know, that's also a very interesting topic. I'm not going to comment on this because of lack of time. But I wanted to say one thing, maybe on a little bit more positive note. I think that in the last years, you know, when the Brexit referendum happened, when the financial crisis hit Europe, when the constitution was rejected in France and in the Netherlands, when the Lisbon Treaty was rejected in Ireland, so many times it was said that this is the end of the European project. Because with these problems, the European Union will not be able to deal with it anymore. And I want to really reaffirm what I said in the beginning. I think all of these things are absolutely fundamental to be addressed. But at the same time, I think if we address them right, if we address them constructively, they can also strengthen this project. And I think in a lot of ways, also the threats to rule of law and democracy can be turned around by this. And we can come out of this as the European Union stronger when it comes to these values. I hope that this will be the lesson learned, not only from the measures now in the Corona crisis, but in general. And I think that also Saturday, and a lot of the things that at least I saw in my timeline, a lot of people engaging in this debate on Europe, I'm hopeful that we can turn this around and win this fight in the end.
So that is exactly the note on which I'd like to end. If I could have like one sentence from each of you, how can we emerge from this crisis as a stronger European Union? So as we just heard from Terry, I will give it to Kathalin first.
Well, I think we have to recognize that if we are strong, if we cooperate, we are stronger, and if we are divided, we are weak. It's not only a slogan, but if we just look into the practicalities on how we can, for instance, procure a vaccine, it's better if we do it together. How can we redirect our resources to the areas which is most needed? This is better if we do it together. I think our countries are so intertwined, our interests are so common when we get to the basis of this. We have such an amazing history of peace and cooperation, and I am also very positive that in the most trying times, people just hold together eventually. And of course, we need institutions which empower these processes. But I hope that the European Parliament will be included in this process, and we will be a very strong and loud and determined voice for more European solidarity and stronger European action. So I will try to do my best, and I hope that we can emerge stronger indeed.
Thank you very much. And Terry?
Well, I can only follow up on what Kaka said, that, I mean, we need the citizens to engage in this. I think that the Future of Europe conference that didn't start on Saturday, but that will start at some point, can be one of the tools. And we obviously need strong civil society. So also, again, thank you very much for organizing this webinar. I think we need organizations exactly like Benai Brit in order to have these voices of the citizens, to have voices of civil society, because this will be the way how we can get stronger out of this crisis and how we can continue to build this project. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. So if we cooperate, we are stronger. European solidarity, a strong civil society, I think are wonderful last notes to end on. Thank you so much for being with us today. So my thanks to MEP Köster, to MEP Cseh, to MEP Reintke, and also to Vice President Vera Jourova. To everyone watching as well, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope we can all meet very soon in person.